Hey, what's going on, everybody out there? So today, I want to talk a little bit about Star Wars: The Acolyte. This show has been so divisive for many different reasons, and there's been a lot of discussion over the last, 6 or so weeks, ever since this show first came out. And I want to talk about it because I haven't really sat down and discussed this show with all of you out there as a whole, and the way that it's had its effect on both the Star Wars community and just in general, a lot of people that love watching shows or any sort of media related to Star Wars. Of course, obviously, I have to let you guys know in the description box down below, I have links to all my different reviews of every single episode of The Acolyte so far. I've been putting a lot of them up over on the Outer Haven, and I feel like they get into depth about my thoughts and my overall outlook on the show as a whole with each individual episode. With the case of episode 1 and 2, they're together because they were a premiere. But the point is, I'm giving you all this stuff so that way you guys can go look at it later or as you're watching this video. That way you could see where I'm coming from and at least try to see some of the points I'm going to make about The Acolyte as a show and the way that it has really just divided and been so kind of like volatile as far as having a conversation when it comes to Star Wars media or just media in general. The big thing that I think we should start out with first is just the way that critics and the audience in general has really taken to this show, because we have one side, which is all the media, all the different critics and a lot of the different content creators that have been talking about this show feel one way, and clearly the audience feels another, but notwithstanding obviously the review bombing and stuff. But most of the people out there that are watching the show are not the ones going on Rotten Tomatoes and actually giving it a down score and stuff. There's a big amount of people, or a large amount of people, that are watching the show and are just not feeling it. If you go over to Rotten Tomatoes right now, you could actually see the scores here. We have 83 and we have 14. Okay, 83 is the big critics score, which is like everybody rated with their individual scores, and 14%, which is the audience score, which has about over 25,000. Yeah, I think it's 25,000 reviews currently right now, which again, you could take out a good chunk of those for just review bombing, either positive or negative. But the point is, though, is that a lot of people feel a type of way about this show, and I don't think it has anything to do with a lot of the stuff that many different outlets, especially ones that are publishing editorials, have to do with it. There are a lot of people that are just divided about this show. Some people feel like it's one of the greatest things for Star Wars, period, and a lot of other people feel like it's one of the worst things for Star Wars, period. And to be honest, where I fall on this is that this show is just straight up not good and has nothing to do with it giving more representation to actors or different types of characters, with some of the subject matter that it gets into, just basic fundamental stuff with the way that a show is constructed, whether it's a movie or a TV show on streaming, is just straight up not good. And what I'm finding is that I'm seeing all these different places giving this show a lot of positive reviews and are just flat out ignoring a lot of the things that many people, myself included, have been bringing up. And then in the face of those same criticisms, starting to call people names and give them titles, give them like labels and stuff, and put them in the same categories as like really bad people on the internet, just for no reason other than the fact that they just don't agree with them. And what's even more sad about that, which I've talked about a few times in various places, especially like on TikTok, you should follow me on TikTok, by the way, I've talked about how it just feels very disingenuous, either by a lot of critics or a lot of different outlets that are reviewing this show very positively, as well as also a lot of content creators, specifically Star Wars content creators, that are just being very disingenuous with the audience at large. What's crazy to me is like, how can you overlook a show that has basic fundamental writing problems and issues that literally the most basic of like TV viewers can see straight right in front of them, and say like, oh no, this is like one of the best episodes ever of this show? It's like absolutely nuts to me. It's just so batshit insane, because it's right there in front of you and you're just going to overlook that. You're going to say like, oh, this show is fantastic, when this thing is literally right here staring you in the face. I mean, how can you like overlook something like that? And this brings me to another problem that I find that The Acolyte specifically has a major issue that none of the other Star Wars shows on Disney Plus have had in the past. It's very hard to talk about this show fairly, because on either side of this equation, or this entire like spectrum of people with opinions about the show, a lot of people feel so strongly about this show that no matter what you put out there, whether you're a critic or just a casual fan watching this stuff, you're going to be just vilified by either side. And that's not a fun part, that's not a fun aspect to be a part of when it comes to these larger conversations about the media we love to see. I think it's just absolutely crazy how I could actually put out my reviews, whether it's on TikTok or if it's in print on the Outer Haven or any other place, and I could get vilified by people saying either I don't understand Star Wars or that I'm just one of these other types of labels, like really bad labels that people put onto me. Yet I've been following Star Wars since a young child, both as a fan and also as a critic, but also I know for a fact I'm not any of these things. I'm just simply talking about a show that just isn't very good. And then this brings me to another thing, or at least two other things I should say, that I feel like are really adding to this entire problem and really muddying up the conversation, especially for Star Wars fans that have been following all these shows since day one. Number one, obviously the show has a big problem matching up with Star Wars canon. That is just like an objective fact. Not only because of Ki-Adi-Mundi being in the show, but also the idea of like the entire premise of this show when matching it up to things we have in the original 6 movies by George Lucas, whether it's The Phantom Menace or all the way down through the prequels and the original trilogy. It's just stuff in here that longtime Star Wars fans know, at least from watching those films, not even just reading the books or the comics or getting the toys or playing the video games, but just from watching those movies. Anybody can know, like, a lot of this stuff that's happening in the Acolyte is a major problem. But then you add on to the fact that not only Lucasfilm themselves currently right now, not just with this show, but in some of the other projects they put up on Disney Plus and a few other places, have really kind of just had this nonchalant attitude when it comes to Star Wars canon. This canon, by the way, that they wanted to establish for a lot of people ever since Disney had bought out Lucasfilm way back when. Now here's the thing, a lot of people when it comes to this canon conversation have pointed to the age of Ki-Adi-Mundi. A lot of people saying that just because it's Legends, it doesn't count. A lot of people saying that it just doesn't make sense visually or just within the plot line of the show, let alone the original 6 movies. Here's the thing about canon that I feel like it's really, especially Lucasfilm's fault with the way that they've handled this. When you go to some of the merchandise that Lucasfilm has signed off on in a lot of different places, you get things like this. This right here is the Topps card that everybody has pointed to for the last like couple of weeks, ever since we had that episode where Ki-Adi-Mundi showed up. This is one of those things that has given us information about characters within the Star Wars universe for years. This actually, the Topps cards themselves, if you know anything about the Topps Star Wars cards, this goes all the way back to 1977 or 1978, when there was little merchandise for the movies, the original 3 movies, but we got to learn more about these characters from this merchandise that Lucasfilm themselves have put out. And with this, we have a definitive age for Ki-Adi-Mundi. A lot of people might write this off as Legends and say that it doesn't really count, but this isn't the first time we've seen this exact thing from Lucasfilm, not just with this specific card. There's actually multiple cards from Topps and other places that say this exact same information. But there's one other thing I want you all to keep in mind. This is something that's not new to Lucasfilm. We got this same exact type of handling with information about the universe and the lore of Star Wars from even the toys going all the way back to 1977 and 1978. Because obviously back then, we didn't have a lot of information about this universe because we didn't have all these movies over the past nearly 50 years. But all that information about some of those characters, Luke, Leia, Han, Darth Vader, R2-D2, C-3PO, the Imperials, the Rebel Alliance, all these different characters we come to learn and appreciate and love over the years, we learned a lot about them from playing with the toys, from getting the toys and reading some of the stuff that was put out there by Lucasfilm themselves. And again, I understand Legends and canon are very different now, but the differences that we have now compared to back then is that a lot of people have grown up with all these different characters and this universe and all this material that's been put out over the past nearly 50 years. And with stuff like this, where Lucasfilm has constantly pushed that stuff out there and now they want to contradict it, you can't help but expect a lot of people out there to feel a type of way about it and be vocal about it and say, yo, that doesn't make any sense. So where in all this stuff, where the critics and a lot of the Star Wars content creators I've been seeing out there start to call people different names and label them for pointing this type of stuff out, or saying that we don't understand Star Wars, or people don't understand what they're talking about, and that the franchise is not for you, or this show is not for you, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, especially for Star Wars fans that have been with this for a very, very long time. And one thing that I really want to point to that I feel like not a lot of people are really talking about, it's been lightly discussed here and there in various shows, but I think we really need to focus on in some way, is the way that Lucasfilm and really, some of the showrunners, particularly Leslie Headland here, has actually talked about their show and talked towards fans. I feel like Lucasfilm just doesn't have a good grasp on how to actually talk with their audience. I feel like a lot of the statements that have come out in various interviews in various different places has not been the best when promoting the shows, but also just shows a real lack of appreciation for not only the reactions and the feedback from fans, but also a real lack of understanding of the universe they're playing in. What sucks about this even more, specifically for the Acolyte, is that Leslie Headland herself and a few other people that have backed her up have said that she really has a good understanding of Star Wars lore and Star Wars mythology, and that doesn't seem to be the case, or at least that's not being shown, not only with the show itself, leading all the way up to episodes 6 and 7 that we've gone up to this point, but also in the way that she does these interviews and how she talks to people. It just doesn't show that whatsoever. When you're getting into conversations with other people, like the one I'm showing here with the Mary Sue, where Leslie Headland comes out and says that she doesn't know about the discourse going on about Ki-Adi Mundi, when she doesn't know why the reaction from Star Wars fans is the way it is, and that she's kind of, just ignoring some of that stuff. That's a big problem, especially when you're working with a franchise that not only has a lot of resonance with a lot of people, but also when you yourself have come out in interviews and said that you have a big appreciation for this franchise, for this universe. How does that make any sort of sense? And on top of that, you can't talk about stuff like this without talking about the actual interview that Amanda Stenberg and Leslie Headland had not that long ago, where everybody points to the same thing. And while I think the topic isn't really relevant to Star Wars itself, there's much more of a bigger topic here that is not being discussed. And it's just the way that they are speaking about the franchise and speaking about the fans, which I think is a big problem and a big point of contention for a lot of people that, again, is just being flat out ignored. I understand that, you want to do stories with representation. You want to do stories based on things that you know. Nobody in the Star Wars fandom, at least nobody that matters out here, has an issue with that. But the problem is how you execute it and how you deliver it and how you actually respond and have a reaction to many of the feedback that you're getting from all parts of the fandom. Not just one section, all parts of the fandom. One thing I do also want to mention too, which I haven't really talked about as much, but people have already discussed at length, that whole music video that Amanda Stenberg had put out there, I thought that was a bad move. Again, I understand the frustration dealing with the franchise and fans that are giving you all this crazy feedback. I can only imagine how stressful it could be. I can imagine how crazy it could be. But someone who is a star in Hollywood, someone who isn't constantly in the spotlight, and someone who is part of this show, who is the star of The Acolyte, you got to move better than that. You can't be putting out diss tracks towards fans and then getting mad at them when they feel a type of way, and then copyright striking some people that are doing videos based on your content that you put out there. It has nothing to do with you as an individual. It has everything to do with your reaction. And it wasn't good to me. I think somebody over there, whether her agent or Lucasfilm, should have pulled Amanda aside and be like, hey, listen, we don't need that right now. Like, that's not the best course of action right now. Again, nothing to do with her as an individual, with her as any sort of thing that she represents or anything like that. It's the reaction and the moves that you're making that are just not good. So that brings me to what will ultimately happen with The Acolyte. What is the kind of end game for Star Wars The Acolyte? And where do we go from here as a Star Wars community, as Star Wars fans, and Lucasfilm themselves? Where do we go to the next steps after this show has finished? I've seen in a couple different places, like The Big Thing from Christian Harloff. I've seen John Campea talk about his stuff. I've seen a lot of other people on various social media come out and say like they're done with this show once they watch it. They're never going to go back and watch it again. This is something that is just going to live there on Disney Plus and just not really get a lot of activity and not a lot of discussion, especially once this show completes and all the controversy and all the backlash and everything else kind of fizzles out. For me personally, I feel like this is one of those shows that I would be totally fine if they just remove it from canon, because there's just way too many contradictions. There's way too many things that don't make a whole lot of sense. There's way too many things that I feel like, even though there are kind of like nuggets of good ideas for the story in here, the way that they've gone about it, the way that Leslie Headland has executed this stuff, and a way also it is matched up to the canon, or at least tried to match up to the canon of Star Wars, has just not worked out the best. So again, it's part of the Disney canon and stuff, but for me, I just don't feel like it should even be canon in the first place. The other sad thing is that I have a feeling that we're going in a direction for these last two episodes, because we just finished with episode 6 recently, but with episode 7 and 8, with some of the stuff that they're kind of hinting at with Star Wars Legends and Darth Plagueis and stuff, I feel like they're going to start bringing elements of that into this show, and it's going to be a shame, because I love those things. I love when Star Wars Legends stuff gets brought into canon, but I don't know if I really want it associated with this type of show after the way that it's been done and the way that everybody has kind of reacted to it, and especially after the way that I felt about watching it these past 6 episodes. I don't know if I want that great stuff that I know from Star Wars Legends and Darth Plagueis and all this other stuff associated with this. So who knows at this point? I feel like things have just been an absolute mess. Things have been a disaster. The way that content creators and a lot of other people in the media have talked about this show has really put a big bad black mark on everything for the most part, because I don't think you could really look at the Acolyte and be as objective as you might want to be, because of all the crazy reactions and the way that people react to what you put out there. It's a shame, because I want to love Star Wars stuff. I gave this show a lot of benefit of the doubt. I was actually really excited when it was first announced, and I just end up walking away from this massively disappointed. One other thing too is that this show, when it was initially pitched to everybody and the first kind of rumblings about it first came out, this show was supposed to be more focused on the Sith and the dark side and all that stuff. And up until episode 6, we've gotten none of that. That's been something that has been completely lost. It's been lost as a mystery show. It's been lost as a focal point of like Sith and dark side talk. It just doesn't feel like it was initially what it was supposed to be, or there was like massive changes on the back end behind the scenes, maybe with Leslie Headland, maybe with Lucasfilm. But I remember specifically those conversations happening in the media in various interviews and some of the stuff that like Lucasfilm was putting out, and I just don't see it. Like, a lot of people have said it's there, but I don't think so. One episode of this stuff doesn't make up for the last 5 that we've gotten that has nothing to do with this. But either way, I just wanted to get my thoughts out there for all of you and kind of get the conversation going, hopefully in a much more better positive light, because like I said, it is very difficult to discuss the Acolyte and just be objective and fair with a lot of newer Star Wars content lately, because of all these different sides just pulling you in different directions and just giving you these labels and making you feel like a bad person for feeling the way that you do about this show. And I don't think it should be like that. I don't think that's the Star Wars fandom's fault. I think there's elements of it that linger in there, but I also put a lot of blame in the way that the conversation has been steered and allowed to linger by Lucasfilm, because I'm a Star Wars fan for life. I've been a Star Wars fan since like day one that I was born, practically, because I come from a very big Star Wars family, and I've been within this galaxy far, far away for many years, and I've always wanted to see it succeed through the good and the bad. But I don't like it when even the stuff that I love to follow and the stuff that I like to talk about, criticize, or even just be hyped up about doesn't even feel like it wants me there to begin with. And that's a shame, because I don't think I'm a bad person talking about this stuff. I don't think I'm wrong with a lot of stuff that I've said, especially when it's more opinion based, but it just comes to a point where it's not fun anymore. And it's a shame, because I want it to be good, and it's just not giving me a reason to be hyped up about it. So anyway, those are my thoughts about Star Wars The Acolyte and everything else going on around it. Let me know your thoughts about The Acolyte if you've been watching the show up till now, down below in the comments section. Have you been enjoying it? Have you been disliking it? What is your thoughts and your perspective on the conversation about Star Wars The Acolyte, the fandom, a lot of the controversy, Leslie Headland, Lucasfilm, whatever have you, okay? Tell me about your thoughts on that stuff down below in the comments section. And of course, as always, make sure you guys leave me a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. There's a lot of Star Wars related content, especially with Star Wars video games, that's up right now that I know a lot of you can enjoy. So if you're not digging a lot of the stuff with the shows like The Acolyte, there's all these Star Wars games like the Clone Wars, like the Phantom Menace. We're going to have Bounty Hunter very soon that we're going to be able to play and talk about. There's a lot of stuff in here on the channel right now that I know you will get a kick out of. That being said, I will talk to all of you again very soon. Peace out and stay epic, everybody. This channel is sponsored by Flynn's Arcade and More, located in Margate, Florida. Flynn's is one of the premier spots for gaming fans in South Florida. They have a variety of arcade games on cabinet for you to play throughout the week, including all of your beloved classics. You could also play a ton of new and current console games too, on PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo consoles. Grab a snack or drink and enjoy the best gaming experience you'll find. Visit during one of their many big events to connect with the gaming community in South Florida. Want to test your skills in competitive fighting games? Join any of the weekly tournaments that happen at Flynn's for a chance for some cool prizes. And if you're into tabletop gaming or model kit building, there's a bunch of events there for you too. Swing by Flynn's Arcade and More, located in Margate Boulevard in Margate, Florida. You won't find a better spot than Flynn's.